We're going to be covering the commonly used string methods and the difference between the string object and string data type itself, and how we can output the characters as well as the different types, checking to see if a value is included, seeing if it's got an index value, last index value, how we can do a replace all, what split does is turning it into an array, and the big difference between the substring, and slice, and how you can utilize the different methods in order to accomplish some really neat things with JavaScript string methods. So that's coming up in this lesson. The string object in JavaScript is used to represent and manipulate a sequence of characters. A div here on the page linking to the JS file, and starting out by connecting to that element that we've got on the screen. So using the document and query selector in order to select the element with a class of output. So that gives us an element that we can output some content to. Let's create some strings, and I'm going to use let in order to select those strings. So call it string1. And we can create a string with JavaScript, and strings, all of the strings by default will be a string object. So that means that we can interact with the string content. So if we wanted to loop through the contents of the string, and each one of these strings will actually have a length with it. So the string object will always have a string length associated with it. So we can get the length of the contents of that string, and it's going to count all of the characters, so including the space. So that's why it's returning back a value of 11 for the string length. So that means that if we can get a length, we can also set a value of a loop, so we can loop through all of the string length and increment it by 1. So if we want to return back the character at that particular location contained within string 1, we can use an index value in order to return back that character value. So that returns back all of the characters. And you can also, instead of using index value, you can also use a string method to access the character and get the character contents by selecting the string, and this is a string method, so that's where we're chaining it together with the dot and using the character at. So whatever character is at that position is going to get what's returned back within the string character. So that's why we've got two of them going there. We can remove out that first console message and see that we're returning back all of the characters that are currently within the string. So the previous method was used and introduced with ECMAScript 5 in order to treat the string as an array-like object where we can get the individual characters. And then now with the newer form of JavaScript, we've got an option to use the character at. So they're both going to return back the same results. If we output and use the type of and check to see what we've got for string, the data type is going to be returned back as a string data type. Whereas if we set it as an object, so let's create another string value and set this using the new string and set it as an object. We can use the same value, and we get the data type of string 2 that's going to be returned back as an object. So the first one is what's known as a primitive string value, and the second one is a string object. String primitives, which is this first string that we've been using, has a string data type of a string, and the string objects, which have a data type of object, differ when you're using eval in order to evaluate the results of the string. So if, for instance, we have a value of 5 plus 5, and we do the eval for those string values, using the eval for string 1, and eval evaluates and returns back the resulting value. So if we use eval for the primitive string type, we see that it actually converted it into a number and returned it back as a number, whereas the object string kept it as a string and constructed the string format from there. So let's add that in when we're constructing the new string, and we see that it still gets returned back as a string object. So it's able to keep it as a string object when it does the eval, whereas when we do the eval of the string 1, if we were to check and see the type of, it's going to be converted into a number type when it does the eval. Just like with array methods, strings can use includes, so they have the includes method, which performs a case-sensitive search to determine whether one string may be found within another string, and it's going to return back a Boolean value. So within the console log, we can check to see if a particular word is within the string, and I'll just update this back to string 1. So we're done with that example. And then we can output hello world here as well. I'll comment out that string. And we're going to throw an error if we're trying to evaluate the type of 1. So let's comment that out. And if we have a string within the string object, we're not going to throw an error if we do the eval on that. So that's another item to note there. So now let's look at how we can use the includes to see if the string includes another string value. So we'll check to see if that value is there. And we'll use the string 1 and run includes. And we'll check to see if hello is included. Remember, this is case sensitive. And we see that it's true that it is included. It will work the same for the string object as the string primitive. So all of these methods will work on both. So you can set it up with either one. There were just some differences with the eval. You can also set a position to have a beginning search position for the word. So if we add in another parameter in the includes and we look at starting at position 4, that's going to return back false. And if we actually have hello world and hello world, that's going to now return back true, because at position 4 and starting position 4, this actually does become true. So it is case sensitive when you are doing the string methods. Just like with array methods, we can check to see if the output, and I'll set up a variable called val that we can update, and I'll output the value of val into the console. So using the string 2, we can do an index of, just like we do with arrays, and check to see a particular search value. And what gets returned back is 0. Let's see what happens for world. So the starting position of where it's first found within the string that we're searching. And if that particular text does not exist, then we get returned back a negative 1 if it doesn't exist. And just as index, we can also do a last index of. So if we do have, like within our string, we have several occurrences of that same character set. So let's look for OR. Initially, we're going to get a value of 7, but if we want to return back the last index of, we can adjust this to return back the last index of. And that should be uppercase. Save that. So the last occurrence that it's able to find. So it essentially starts at the end of the string, whereas index of starts at the beginning of the string. We can also do a replace. So selecting the string 2 and then using replace. So the character that we want to search out, so let's search out for OR. And what do we want to replace it with? So I'm going to replace it with wow. So it returns back the new result where that has been replaced for val. And now also if you output the value of string 2, it's still back to the original. So this is not actually updating the original string. It's just returning back to overwrite the original string. Then you could do it this way, where now if you get and output the string 2, that has overwritten and replaced that value. There's also a replace all. And the difference here is that replace all will replace all the occurrences of it. So it will replace all of the occurrences of OR and return back that new value of the string. For the string as well, we can do a string split. So let's take string 1 and using split. So what that did is that converted into an array. So we didn't indicate what character we're looking to split. So I'm just using the space in order to the split. So essentially that turned the string into an array. So it puts the string values into an array and it returns back an array. And that's where val now is assigned as an array. And we're using the separator of space. So we could also use various separators as well. So we could use O if we wanted to as a separator. And what happened is that it actually is going to remove out the separator from the character. And as you can see, it's returning back an array and it's taken out all of the letter O's and broken it apart, separated it into an array format. There's also substring as well. So let's take val and we'll use string 2 this time. And then using the substring, which will return back part of the string, so from the start and the end indexes of the string. So it's requiring the 2 parameters there. And you can also just use the start index. So for instance, if we want to return back as start index val 0, and I'm actually going to use the output and set the inner text value of val. So that way we can see it being displayed on the screen as well as in the console. So using substring 4, our current value of string was hello world. So starting at position 4, it's going to cut the string and return back the substring. So if we only want to return back the characters between 4 and 5, it's going to return back that 1. So the other argument in the substring is to return back the index. So it's from the starting index to the end index. So the end index is optional. If we want to select from the first 8 characters of the string, the first item in the string, the first index value is going to be 0. Now there is a subtle difference between substring and sub string, and whereas with substring, the difference is that we're returning back the characters and with the starting index value and returning back the characters, the number of characters that we're returning. So whatever the starting character is and how many characters we want to return back. So that returns back the characters LLO starting at character position number 2 and returning back 4 characters that are associated there. We do 8, so it's going to return back the next 8 characters. And there's also one other one that can return back a piece of your string. So this will illustrate the difference between substring and slice. So these are almost identical, and there's a couple differences in the way that the negative arguments are dealt with between the two. So let's select, and just as we saw with substring, if we use slice, it can take in the two arguments. So one is going to be the starting and one is going to be the ending index value. So right now it's returning back the same result. So I'll add in a console log of val just after the substring so that we can do a comparison between the slice and the substring. So right now they're returning back the same results. So we can see that in line 27 and 31 in the console. So what happens if we update this to -8 and if we update the slice to -8? And we see now we do have a difference, that when we're using the -8, that with the substring, what it does is it doesn't update it, and it doesn't, what the slice does is, and the difference is that the slice will treat it as counting backwards from the end of the string to find the index when we do the -8, whereas with the substring, and I need to update that substring to be -8, whereas the substring, what it does is it treats it as 0. So treat the negatives differently, and that's the big difference between the substring and slice in the outputs. And you can see that here within the console where we're outputting that value. So those are some of the commonly used string methods that you can go through to become more familiar with how to use string methods in JavaScript.